computer was freshly rebooted because they left it open on the kitchen table, and of course the cat probably spent half the night sitting on top of it. So somehow he manages to push the right buttons to make it reboot. You'd think that Apple should work on that. That seems like a valuable defense system to put into the being hacked by a cat in real time. It's not good. Okay, so Ukraine, right? So Russia looks to be attacking all through. It's an invasion. You don't see it yet. This is just our small version of it, right? But you don't see anything yet. This is through yesterday. But if you start to, look at some of the words that are in there, it is starting to pile up. Someone's birthday has disappeared, right? So this is compared to the week before. There's a lot of like sort of smaller pieces, but they are mounting towards the top. Some swearing, some bad things. So we'll sort of see if it registers. There's work. I should find it that it's older work. There are no graphs or anything in this paper, and they just sort of have a table, I think, at some point. But people have sort of turned it into nice visualizations, and it's difficult work, right? It's curating, going through primetime news in the U.S. Maybe this was I don't know when this was, how long ago this was, but looking to see how much they talked about disasters around the world of various kinds. And it was sort of more natural disasters. So volcanoes, earthquakes, but things out to famine, which are much more, there's a more social element to that. Anyway, they're able to kind of come up with a sort of an equivalency between the number of deaths that a natural disaster had to cause to get the same amount of coverage. So like 1 or 2 deaths in a volcano is worth like, I think 10,000 deaths in a famine. Like that would then they'd be talked about in the same amount. And it's a real scale. Like it's not just, major events. There's not a bimodal thing. There's this sort of gradual, and it makes sense, right? The events are they're a little more diffuse, less immediate. They did a good job of looking at where the events were happening around the world and how that affected things. All right, so attention being paid, and we did work on this last year for COVID. Kind of the main story there was there's a bad thing in China. We did this in 2020 happening. That's in January, and then basically the world's attention just turned away from it, just kind of dropped the ball. And other things happened. There was a Super Bowl. Trump, just as president, had a trip to India. Went to India in February, like this time 2 years ago. Yeah. And it would be like 2 weeks later when the NBA would cancel and or suspended season. Tom Hanks would say he's got COVID, which is that's pretty that actually had an effect. And the language started to change coming from the White House. And it had been declared a pandemic properly, although we'll see. Anyway, so that's there. If you look in the Russian time series, right? So we have. I'll talk a bit about this today. We have 10 languages. They're not perfect, right? It's a bit messy, but we've kind of constructed a hedonimeter thing. The word happy has been drained out. If you look at the negative ones and try to do this translation, it's going to fail a bit. It's just sort of using Google Translation. But swearing, which at least for Russian evaluations, these are negative words. Some just bad things, but war is obviously through here. It's not that we know, I guess, what's happening, but it's this is just to see what the overall signals are like from one space, from Twitter. All right. I'm going to see if this works. This is disinformation on Sesame Street. May have seen this. This is poor old Elmo. Elmo, who is totally real and kind of is, right? I mean, he's an entity, I mean, you could easily have a make-believe conversation with Elmo. I just Googled for this, so we'll see what this one does. Okay, there's something wrong with sound. What is up with sound? Why would there be? Would it be that giant thing that says off? Maybe. No. Well, is it that? What would that be? What magical thing? Maybe it's okay now? What?
Yay!
Oh,
Yay! Rocco is in a movie. Let's hear it for Rocco. Wasn't Rocco great, Elmo?
Yes, he was great.
Yeah.
Now, Elmo can finally tell everyone that today's number is... Can Elmo tell it?
Who's stopping you?
Great. Today's number is...
12! Rocco says the number is 12!
Elmo is supposed to say the number of the day, not Rocco.
Well, Rocco says you were taking too long. He couldn't wait anymore.
just be clear. Rocco is this character that Zoe is holding, right? This is a
Elmo doesn't believe this! All day long, Elmo wanted to do was say the number of the day. But now, Elmo has to sing to Rocco. Elmo has to play the silly word game. Elmo was to watch Rocco's favorite movie. And when finally it came time for Elmo to say the number of the day, Rocco said it before Elmo!
Oh, well. Come on, Elmo. Let's play with Rocco.
Oh, no. Elmo is not playing with Rocco or you anymore. Elmo is going to play by himself.
Wait, Elmo. Come back. Rocco says he didn't mean it.
I don't know what the. We'll have to find out what the end of that is. But there are many of these scenes where Zoe is just cranking poor old Elmo. Well, it's unclear what Zoe really thinks, but there's like a cookie one where she says, this cookie is Rocco's, and he's like, he's not even alive. He's like absolutely losing it. The adults don't seem to help. I don't know what. Anyway, Sesame Street's got a lot of make believe stuff, but this is from maybe 20 years ago. They're trying to tackle these things. I'm old enough so that when I was a kid, Sesame Street was a new thing. It was fantastic. I watched it twice a day. They just repeated it. We had two channels where I grew up. There's like the ABC, which is like the BBC, Australian Broadcasting Commission, and then a commercial one. Anyway, they used to play Sesame Street a lot. And I think it was really important. I learned a lot from Sesame Street. How to count, how to be a good human, what Americans sounded like. That was also important. Certain Americans, Cookie Monster. Yeah. When I first came to the US, people couldn't understand me on the phone, right? So I'd be trying to give numbers or letters or whatever, and I would go into a Cookie Monster voice because that was totally fun. 1, 2, 3, 4. Anyway, Sesame Street, it's great. Jim Henson, what a total hero. Maybe that was the most compelling one. But look, this is Elmo. Elmo is just like losing it, and he's the one holding up for truth and like basic reality. Like it's just being rendered in front of him. Yeah, it's really rough. All right, disinformation, which is right. We've been. We've had it for ever, thousands of years, right? Disinformation happens in the natural world, right? Things pretend to be other things, and then they eat you or whatever. And, that's good old disinformation, camouflage. Walking with a limp, all these things, right? It's very, I don't know. Do amoebas have disinformation? There's some pretty elemental stuff where there's some fakery going on, right? Because it's an arms race, evolution, or games. But it's on Sesame Street too. Anyway, Snuffleupagus was just an imaginary friend for Big Bird when I was a kid. It was totally fine, but he was really frustrated because he'd say Snuffy told me, and they're like, who, like no one else could ever see Snuffleupagus. And I guess they eventually made Snuffleupagus come out and be someone that everyone saw because it was apparently too painful for kids. But I don't know. I was pretty okay with Snuffy, but it was rough on Big Bird. Big Bird, who's just decent human. Okay, all right. So we will. Gee. Okay, one more thing. Story. Let's see if we can get our poor old story wrangling thing to run. It's a bit slow. Um, but we could, we could search for war. It'll come up eventually. All right. The happiness thing, of course, is this big average of everything. But maybe we can. Once we get this thing to really work, it'll be able to be all connected. Anyway, because it's supposed to find the stories. All right. So you've I've talked about this, but I want to go through this happiness bias because it's important in itself, and connected to this much older literature of psychology, and show you that in fact there is a deeper thing when we get to oosiometry, which is it's a safety bias actually, right? So we'll get there. So this was a PNAS paper from a few years ago. It's a nice place to land. I mean, there's plenty of terrible stuff in PNAS. The joke, right, is probably not accepted at science for PNAS or post-nature in science. And it's a bit of a funny place. It is probably the best in terms of whatever these measures are of for a general purpose place. It has science from everywhere. Nature and science are much more sort of biology kind of things, really. They do have a bit of everything. They throw the dinosaur people a bone now and then, so to speak. Okay, all right. So, and the big problem with PNAS, if you go across articles, is that National Academy members can put their own stuff in, right? So they just shovel it in, and you have to look at the how it was contributed, just contributed by, and you're like, wow. So. Okay, so these are strong statements, right? So stories we tell about ourselves, as cultures, as peoples, as groups of all kinds, and of course individually, they really vary kind of enormously. I've sort of put two normal ends, right? So Jainism, you're not allowed to hurt anything, right? So you got to walk around and not touch the ants and stuff. So it's veganism gone wild, but it's it's this aesthetic kind of approach to things, aesthetic, and then Ayn Rand, who's sort of very strange character, really, but somewhat beloved. Did you tell me you've read? No. So has read Rand any of her books? Yes, I thought so. I didn't want to.
I read Atlas Shrugged and Leave the Living, and I actually thought Leave the Living was really good.
I don't know what that one is. Yeah, what's that one?
It's like a much less. She's like talking. It's fiction, but it sounds like it's based a lot on her experiences in Russia.
Right, because she's a Russian immigrant to the U.S. Yeah.
Yeah, so her beliefs come through just fine, but like that isn't the main thing she's trying to do. So they aren't like.
Right, which Atlas Shrugged is like, yeah. So it's basically be selfish, right? Just which feeds into, well, it's kind of a pretty easy philosophy, right? It's very simple, right? And then the idea, so this is a complex system story, right? Because like the principle is everyone behaves like this, it's the right thing to do locally, and globally it will make for a better society as well, right? So you think about the way people talk about political structures and so on. The intent is, or at least maybe on the surface, that we'll have a better society if we do things in this way. That might be a cloak for we will have all the money, but it will sound good. Anyway, these are really different things, right? Never hurt anything at all. Doesn't matter what it is. I mean, they'll be upset about finding about nematodes and viruses and stuff, but out to deeply kind of selfish. Anyone who comes within a foot of me or whatever, blah blah blah. All these things. So it's it's interesting. So what's on any stories? All right. So how do we convey them? Language, right? I mean, puppet shows and movies and all sorts of other things, I suppose. But language pervades everything, and it's our great social technology, right? Pretty excited about TikTok as a social technology, but language is it. Language is it, right? Language is unbelievable, and of course we have all these different types and variants of language that really sort of show the sort of incredible possibilities. They are, tragically evaporating, dying out at some rate. But anyway, so it's this rich space, and of course animals have it too. But we convey our stories through language. So this is a really elemental thing. It's not going to be about the stories we tell, which is another higher level. But this is just going to be the atoms of stories. So what's the distribution of this emotional content of the atoms of language, right? We measured it, and then we made an instrument. But in truth, we hadn't really looked properly at the distribution of these happiness scores. And in some ways, what had happened, because we'd started with that ANU data set, and that was kind of weird. It was a little more negatively skewed. It's just we always knew it was a weird subsample. So as I've showed you, we got to over 10,000 words from words that are actually the very important thing, because we're trying to measure a social thing. These are the words people actually use, right, most commonly. So that's going to be a really difficult. This is a difficult thing for people to manage. It's true in ecology or handle, anything where you have these zip distributions. People struggle with them. In parks, of course, you sort of go berserk with allotaxonometry and those things. But this is another sort of way into thinking about the frequency of usage that will be important here. Okay, so we've got English plus 9 other languages, and just as I was sort of babbling about, we have to think about usage frequency. We have to think about that. So, not thinking about that, this is what we get to start with. So that if we just take out 10,222 words, whatever it is, about that many, and just plot a histogram, then we get this. Right, so there's nothing. Each word gets one vote, right? There's no corpus. I mean, it started from a corpus. We took the most frequently used ones: Twitter, Google Books, New York Times, and music lyrics. So we started with that, but now we've put them all together, and we've shown our full frequency of usage, right? So it's just a lexicon. These are just types. And there's a histogram of their happiness scores. And there's clearly this sort of positive bias. There's a lot of neutral stuff, true, and that's, that's done all these sorts of things for our lenses and our instrument. We're stepping away from the instrument now just to kind of think about what this distribution is like. And in asking people beforehand, which I didn't really do for you, I mean, you've sort of been sitting here going through all this stuff, but people have a bit of a funny view of this. They tend to think maybe there are more negative words than positive words, or that it might be neutral, or that certain languages are more skewed than others. And certain languages might be negatively biased. Anyone want to guess which languages are negatively biased? You don't have to do this, because people will say it, they'll offer it for you, and it's like, it's a little bit of a, what's that? Yeah, I mean, it's a, I remember saying some German fellows like, oh, the Russians, or whatever, right? And it's just like, okay. Or it's too hot. Yeah. Like Australia. Lots of swearing. Every second word is swearing. Okay. But then it's different, right? It's like saying Anyone ever seen Trailer Park Boys? That's basically what I grew up with. Yeah, it's good. That's the most organic swearing I've ever seen on a show. And I'm like, yes, this is how you talk. It's just unreal. Yeah, when I was a kid, I really thought swearing was terrible. My mother was right, and so and my next brother is 2 years younger than me, and we were in a small school out in the bush, sort of thing. And it's like maybe 25 kids max from like elementary school. So like it actually had 2 rooms, right? So so there are actually 2 rooms. It's lasted for over 100 years. It closed down eventually, but anyway, that school, yeah, we had the biggest grade. There were 4 kids in our grade, huge number of kids. But mostly you were just sort of mixed. So my little brother comes to school and he just swore like crazy. He picked up every swear word you ever heard from shearers and farmers, and he just injected it. He loved it. And and the whole world. I mean, it seemed to me like everyone started to swear because of my middle brother just transformed the vocabulary of the place. But basically, it was just taking the ambient culture and just like injecting it properly. Yeah, that was a school that had actually had grounds and so on. My grandmother was sent out to basically the middle of nowhere to teach in a school that was just in the corner of a field. That's it. It's like a little corner of a field. There's no nearby town to that place. Yeah. Anyway, long stories. So, I mean, you could kind of get a little carried away and say, look, this is a measure of sociality, right? There's this positive bias, like the words we use, at least the atoms, we can say terrible things to each other and about things and whatever, but in general, maybe that's not the case. And so, that's my little. Why don't you do what the thing? Oh, I think I know what it is. Because of the rebooting, the cat. Thank you, cat. Why does Zoom? I don't want Zoom. Why is Zoom trying to be here? Ooh, that was weird. Did I totally push the wrong thing? Like I tried to push a. Oh yeah, I guess I did. Wow. Um. Okay. Okay. Maybe. Okay. Okay. So this fits in then with the Pollyanna hypothesis. So Pollyanna is like originally a story, and Pollyanna like thinks everything's great. It's like Candide. Everything's terrific. Um, toxic positivity, right? It's like bad things do happen. Like it is dangerous to just like think everything is great or whatever. Like yeah. Um, it's lots of ends of the spectrum to occupy, but certainly we know humans who do this. But that's it. It got lifted out of this, a story, and this was sort of psychologists kind of putting this together in various spaces, often just analyses of communication between people, right? Just like watching people talk, counting up what's going on, and kind of evaluating it. And right, and sort of the summary of it is that the interactions between people, by and large, in the world are predominantly positive. Russia invades Ukraine, like terrible things happen. Rocco, drives Elmo crazy, and he says bad words as far as Sesame Street goes. But you know, so of course, it's not saying that it's all all like that. So this is a bit strong, right? Which is because Pollyanna, I think, is. I can't remember if Pollyanna learns or Candide learns. I don't really. My lack of knowledge. Okay, so this is another sort of view into this is that we anchor our words. Well, we have a lot of words where we have at least in English, where we have a prefix that indicates a opposite. So mal and un, dis, anti. There are quite a few of these. There are some that go the other way, but and I know I've mentioned this, but we tend not to say someone's unsad, right? This gets into like it's 1984 language, right? It's double plus I'm good sort of stuff, and that's pretty weird. I mean, all well, right? I mean, understanding the power of language. So we do that. And again, this is this piece, the Anna Karenina principle. People, I guess it's controversial, right? The guns, germs, and steel thing from Jared Diamond, but sort of leaving all of that aside, which is that civilizations could only appear if a number of things are met, right? So that there's there's land that's reasonably, the agriculture could come out of. You need an animal that you could domesticate, right? So, llamas are a bit of so some things don't, like kangaroos, we don't have them pulling. Be pretty funny, but they're not pulling tractors around or something like that. Wombats maybe. Anyway, so but of course the English brought horses and cows and all these things. Never really thought about it. So could you I mean it's there are parts of the world where it's just much harder. It's sort of reasonable to say this. It's much harder to if you start with nothing to kind of, get to iPhones, right? It's pretty hard. Like it's a difficult place to just survive in, full stop. And Australia is kind of one of them, right? The middle of Australia, really hard. And a lot of everything is just surviving, right? Which is true for a lot of animals, except maybe otters and crows and whatever. But yeah. Anyway, so this is guns, germs, and steel. Okay, so this is a little this is a bit of a difficult thing for this because it doesn't look like we have as many negative words. We have more positive words. We have more negative words. But what we see in other ways is that there's more diversity down here. So that kind of handles that. But we don't have frequency of word usage, right? So this by itself isn't enough. You have to be careful with this. And so this is an attempt to, just for English, so I call these jellyfish plots, and they're in a paper, so it's real. This is work that's now about 10 years old, but Isabel Klauman went off to work with Facebook, and she's the lead author on this paper. So that's a good thing. Good, fantastic human. One of the first Storylab people, probably the first, I think. So, okay, so what is it? So this is this underlying distribution for English, like I just showed you, and that's the midpoint. So the yellow is going to mean positive, gray is going to mean negative. So you can see that there is this positive bias here. That's true for the New York Times. Music lyrics, yes. I mean, just visually, right? The mode is at the center here. And Google Books has a positive bias as well. These are tricky because New York Times, this isn't then indexed by how much the articles are read, right? So there are sort of two layers of popularity. This is really a difficult thing. Same with music, like which songs are listened to. Books, which books are read. Twitter is the one that's different here because we have retweets. So that there's amplification built in on top, right? So no social amplification is measured in these, but it is in here. And we weren't clear about that back then either, I don't think. Because this is 20 years of the New York Times, it has just a built-in zip distribution for word usage, right? So which words are being used. And what is this plot? Okay, so this is average. This is the happiness of words across here. Each point is a word, and its horizontal point is its average score of happiness. And then down to 5,000, this is the rank of the word within the New York Times. So the and of and are going to be up here. They're going to be fairly neutral. But you can see there's a speckling as it comes down. And what this is, I think it's every, I'm trying to remember, maybe 500. So you take the first 500 ranked words, right? So the most common words. And then what these are, the deciles, right? The percentiles at 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. Okay. And so the median would be this one. And then we're just going to slide that window down, right? So they're overlapping. We're going to say, let's take 2 to 501. And we're just going to slide this window down and find the deciles and plot them, and then connect them. So this is the 10% decile of this sliding window going down like this. It's a little messy. There are fewer words over here, so it jumps around a little bit. But the fact that, so this looks kind of like a jellyfish, right? Its tendrils kind of go straight down. It's not swimming very fast. If they went this way or kind of contracted, it means that there's something different about rarer words than common words. So this was something, I mean, we didn't know what this would look like. It could be that there's really, this was all very neutral in here. And indeed, the first, maybe 100 words are pretty neutral. But you can see it's pretty consistent down here. Music lyrics, I recently had a bunch of emails from, I think, a psychology professor, because we did regression on this, and you can see there's a slight, you don't want to generalize too much from this, but you can see there's maybe a slight negative trend, a little bit, right? I don't know if I can see that. A little bit, but it depends. Maybe in Twitter, for example, which, I mean, we say that's true, right? We say that's true, but it's not the big story, right? The big story is it's pretty stable. If you plot if you do a regression for the, say, the median, as it goes out with rank, it's pretty slow. All right, so it's only the top 5,000 words. It would be great to have, 45,000 more words. They're going to get pretty messy eventually, but it costs a lot of money to run these things well. So that was a problem. All right, so all of them have basically this sort of shape. You can see books are a little more kind of closed in general. And this is, you can sort of see like these efforts we have to try and make these things more readable, right? We couldn't see any words in that last one. So in this case, this made kind of just, so this is just an idea, right? So we just gridded this thing and then went through and labeled words kind of, I think, alternately. The colors just mean just to make them a little more separable and easy to read. And then there's a random rotation on them. So there's just an effort to make it's a sophisticated word cloud thing, right? I mean, it's a word cloud where the points, the locations have real meaning. I tweeted yesterday, old man yells at word cloud, which is a Simpsons reference, right? There's an old man yells at cloud. It's Abe Simpson yelling it. Makes the local newspaper. But yeah, word clouds are, I mean, they're beautiful things, they're fun things, but they're not, if we're going to do scientific things, we should put them in. So this now gives you a bit of a sense of where things are. Obviously, not everything's plotted. It's just in these places, it's going to be a random thing. And there are some weird words here and there, but so these are common words that are negative, right? They're used a lot. New York Times reports these things. This is going to be in the society section. Probably similar here, talking about people's relationships. So these are all positive things. And as you sort of move down here, still positive, they have the same positivity, but they're being used less and less and less, at least in the New York Times. And same here, right? So these are all bad things, but being used less and less and less. Lobbying, only a little bit bad. And then, so the words that are neutral are kind of, again, potentially because people are disagreeing. Okay, so that's, again, one of these jellyfish plots, but it's got some labels on top so you can kind of see if it's reasonable. Okay, so then this is the paper we, excuse me, holding it together. Okay, this is the paper where we reported on, because there's an earlier paper we have just for English, reported on 10 languages now. So the English ones come from Mechanical Turk. All of these other ones, so there are 9 other languages, they come from, I know it's a bit hard to read, impossible to read, but what we did, and it was expensive, it took a lot of money to set this up, asked people through a, did I mess that up? Through a translation service, right? So these are people who are sophisticated language people. They had to pass a test, which was actually pretty hard. Like, I think for us for English, it was, you had to concentrate. Like, you had to be quite have real facility with the language. So these people, we gave them more money, and again, it was 50 people per word, right? So that's a pretty big sample. Let's see. So so it's spread around the world, and the corpora that we use, there are 24 different corpora. You can sort of see them scattered around. So the 4 corpora for English, 24 corpora overall, 10 languages. They come from different places, right? So there's Twitter and news and those things, but subtitles for movies was another source. Google Books, there's also a big corpora from Google where they've just like every site they'd scraped over many, many years, they just kind of put that together. So it's like a Google Web Corpus thing. So a few other kinds of sources. So it's quite distributed types of sources. Some of them have social amplification built in, like Twitter. Some of them don't. They all have zip distributions because that's the way language works. But what have we got? So we got, and then you had to choose where the people, so Spanish is evaluated by people in Mexico, for example, right? So it was concentrated in that area. English, as it turns out, is a mixture of people in the US and India because Mechanical Turk works that way because they wanted to make a artificial intelligence that was awake all the time, and the sort of payment was an issue as well, and really Bezos was trying to get to space anyway, so like for a minute. Anyway, so Indonesia is in here. We have South Korean for South Korea. We have one corpus for Chinese, one for Arabic. This was done by Egypt. We have Russia, Germany, and France. There's another one here, and I think 3 each for those. So there's a bit of there's an issue with getting the corpora. And then Portuguese, we had Brazil. Right. I think I've got them all. So could be improved, but it's we did a reasonable job at the time. We don't need to talk about that. It got a lot of buzz. I think it was the top 100 article for 1 year in terms of being talked about. Whatever. Okay, so this is one way to look at it. So, and in these things here, right? These are just I've just sort of mirrored this thing to give them a little more pop. But again, these are these histograms, and then the median is actually shown here in red, right? So you can see that. So one thing to see is the median in red is to the right, except for yeah, it's the median, not the mode. The median. So even music lyrics is there, but all of them have a red bar to the right. So people have said Russian would be negative or whatever. It turns out this is not the case. So this is sort of this big observation. Yes, there are more languages. Yes, there are more corpora, but it's a pretty good coverage that suggests something here. So here they're ordered by median. And, this does show you at least, this is Spanish. And again, people in Mexico, Portuguese, people in Brazil, they tend to be a little bit towards the top for different corpora. So again, it's a social measure, right? So it's the words people use in these contexts, and then it's how people feel about them, evaluating them, right? So that's a social measure. It's not telling you like about the authors so much. It's like the experience. All right, but English is here, but also I think further down, music lyrics is down here. It's a different space. Russian is here, here, and here. So some scrambling. Chinese is here, but it's quite muted. I mean, I think there are issues with how the quality of just the corpus we had there. We're doing what we can. Indonesian is, has a couple of different locations. So, I mean, what we tried to show here, and we did put this ordering, we did order it, was that, overall there is a positivity bias for all of them, and that's the zeroth order thing. That's the big piece. So there's an article in Science magazine writing about it, which the headline was "Spanish is happy, Chinese not so much." That's what they went for. They went for the, you try anyway. It's a little bit on us, I suppose. This is ordering by variance, like the variance of the thing, and that's a bit different. It bounces them up and down. You see Brazil and Mexico kind of push, at least for Twitter, there's pretty good spread. So there's more emotional space there, maybe. Plausible. Russian books now, they've tightened up. But again, these are all variations on a theme. We wouldn't expect them all to be exactly the same. And then when you look at different types of corpora, Twitter, Twitter's here, different places, Google Books, they're not hewing necessarily to some ordering. Okay. So this is German. In German, right? So there are, so some of these will make sense. We have in the archive version, we have a full, an enormous, not enormous, but a pretty long appendix, which has this, and then it's translation. I don't think the translation's here. Arabic, Chinese, Google Books. You can see that tightness here. Again, this is Portuguese Twitter, and this is when I know we did the ridiculous stretchable word thing, but this is when I made this plot and it pops up and I'm like, what is this? I had no idea what this was, right? So you have to start Googling for things with lots of K's, which, you put a lot in. But this is laughter, right? And so this is, they have a few of these for sure, but this is an easier one to type. It's a good, like, it's good. Death things here. My Portuguese is not good, I will be honest. So we have a whole bunch of these. We also have similar ones, but which have the standard deviation. So the distribution is standard deviation, so you can see which words have the most, people disagree the most on. Same kind of, and the standard deviation kind of plots, the jellyfish plots are similar looking things. Korean Twitter, right? So this is, I believe, a ha 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 type thing. However, there's this, the antiparticle, which is, what is, this is what I think, what I believe it is. Do you know what so they're pies. It's a bunch of pies together, kind of. So or little temple things. Anyway, it's a picture. It's supposed to represent this is pre-emoji. Okay, so it's supposed to be like streaming with tears, right? Like just crying, like the classic kind of anime thing where someone really, and they just, rivers run down and sort of close their eyes. So this is sad, 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 sad. So it's the opposite of although it is complicated, right? There's, once you get out so much with laughing, there's crying, and so the crying, laughing emoji is, it's really, yeah. This is supposed to be just crying, I think. But that could connote, I don't know. The emojis are in here. Here's war, by the way. Finally came up. It's gonna pop. We have lots of languages. So now we need to put the word for war in Russian. Let me try to do that. Google translate war. It didn't do it for me, of course. War in English, Russian. This one? How does it look? Let's see if this explodes it into flames. It probably will. Language is going to be Russian. I came here looking for emojis, but all right, we'll give that a little think. Good God. Anyway, but again, it's sort of same thing. Maybe there's a little drift on this one to the left, but so these are subsets, right? But the rarer ones are just longer. Fair enough. And the errors in this, there are no errors. Well, there could be. You could hit the keys nearby, but they're just, it's easier to let it rip. They have a different distribution because of insanity. Going the wrong way. All right. This plot, took some work, is to show that, and it is reciprocal, right? So it's just, there's no extra information necessarily above or below. It's just, they should be just reciprocal. So this is terrible rendering, but this is Portuguese and Spanish. And what we've done here is take all the words in our roughly 10,000 words of Portuguese, use just Google Translate, like I just did, translate them into Spanish, and then translate them back. And the ones that come back as the same ones, we'll say they're translation stable, at least with this, messy black box. Then we'll plot the happiness score for Portuguese and Spanish, right, as they were measured. So I think everything, it should be reciprocal. So you can see, again, that kind of happiness bias, right? There are more words in here. There are some words that, they're really off axis. It's true. Why is this graph so bad? Anyway, yeah. Enormous amount of effort, like it's totally madness, but try to make things that are SVG or, that are, like you don't want your figures to be PNGs. When we started to first publish in PLOS ONE, they're like, we want everything as TIFFs. I'm like, You monsters, right? You absolutely, because I mean, they'd make a web version, I suppose, but they just wanted everything in TIFFs. So I made these like little tiffify Perl scripts to like try and using image magic to like absolutely maximize all the resolution and lots of arguments. But some of these things, you want to be able to zoom in. All right, so that's that one example. And then generally, as you look across, there's a correlation coefficient in here, 0.89 for, they're pretty strong there. Lots of 0.8 something. This is words. It should be pretty messy. It should be some mess. Things like, say, Korean and maybe Russian, it's still 0.8. There are less negative words that are kind of translation stable, as we would say. Chinese with Arabic does maybe a bit better. It seems to have more words. So the number of words that are left is here. Hard to read. This is Chinese and English. Not bad. There's a little delta, which is like how much is there a shift, right? Is there because it's not, it's how much is it shifted that way? Right, so they're opposite each other. That's a plus 0.07 and a minus 0.07. So they are shift a little bit, potentially. But generally speaking, this could have been, this or cloud of points or something crazy. I mean, it can't be this. That would be terrible, Like if you think murder is a good word in your language, it's probably things are a little messed up. But it could be much messier. And of course, we're just using Google Translate. So this was something to show that, we're not, you have to be careful. People get upset about universal things in language or whatever. Right? We get into terrible trouble with the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, which is that language really fashions the way you think. You know about this, but the Sapir-Whorf, have you ever heard of this thing? I mean, it's just a bad history thing especially for people coming from the so-called hard sciences, maybe into linguistics, but of course, all of that is madness. But I think one of them was an engineer, maybe, and the Sapir and Whorf, the two characters. It sounds great. It's WHORF and SAPIR. But it's supposed to be, right, it's all these sort of things like, oh, here's a language that doesn't have, has words for like 3 colors, or this one doesn't have words for certain numbers, or numbers above 10 or something like that, right? And then they claimed that this then really constrained the sort of things you could think about. German sort of humorously has a word for everything. So maybe they blah, blah, blah. So you might want to think about that. But then there's, you can construct those words, right? All those with phrases in other languages. It's not, Anyway, there's sort of a huge pushback onto that, which became kind of, there's nothing, right? Language has no effect on people's thinking. There's thinking, which is underneath. Language is just some way to, whatever. More recently, there's been some, I think, studies that have kind of shown, well, that's not really the case. It's a bit mixed. People will still say it doesn't really matter much on a big scale. But I think it's more, I think the scientific work just has to continue. Like, I don't know. There are studies apparently, for example, like in Russian, there are a couple more words for blue. And Russian people are better at distinguishing blue, like they have a faster reaction, maybe, right? I don't know if that study could have exploded because we're in this messy stuff. Another one is, I recall, is a word for key and bridge. Those words in, I think, Spanish and maybe German, right? So they're gendered articles. And they swapped, right? So one is feminine and in one language and then masculine in the other. And there are people asked to describe them. So if a bridge was feminine, people tended to use words more like slender and whatever, and like strong, and like there was genderedness in their descriptions based on whether it's like le or la, if we use the French, which is ridiculous, right? I mean, that just shouldn't matter, and it is a total minefield when you go to other languages. English has lots of problems, but the table is not feminine for some reason, or dogs and cats are, like they. I don't know. Anyway, yes. It's bad code, basically. It's just bad code. It is bad code. Yeah.
Isn't there, like, so I know, like, the language is used with that effect, the way we think, but doesn't the way you consume the medium through which language is, how they can take language. So, like, usually all of your information might be an oral tradition or, like, speaking of it, reading.
Versus TikTok.
No, this is like in high school. I had this creative writing teacher.
Okay, yeah.
Read a ton about this stuff.
So there's the medium is the message. There's that. There's McLuhan, right? Which is just like like so much as the fact that it's TV versus books is gigantic.
I mean, like, just like the.
But you know, I
versus JFK, like, when the first televised presidential debate.
Nixon sweated.
Yeah, and Nixon was on radio. Like, if you ask people who listened to the debate when he was radio, they were
It just didn't look good on TV.
And then everyone that watched it were like,
Right.
And then it's like also people did a difference, like, someone did a study of interviewing people who had been in primarily places with like oral histories versus places where people didn't like a lot of reading. And like they had a higher people that engaged in primarily oral histories had a harder time engaging in like abstract concepts.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Like,
that's interesting. I mean, Plato apparently really hated written word. Like he wanted oral, you know, like, right? I mean, it was the thing.
Like they would ask a lot of questions when you would ask something that was like not like a situation that would never arise. They would act like, you know, why would you ask this?
Right.
So
I don't know. Yeah.
Maybe the language we're using doesn't change the way we think, but like.
Well, it seems to it somewhat. We just like to some degree. It's not zero. It's not enormous. Right. But it's somewhere in the middle, and it matters. Yeah. It's also something that people tend to think. If you just ask them, they're like, "Oh, sure, like it must matter," which is interesting. I think they're like totally must matter. If you know, like it must matter. It has to matter somewhat, right? But there's a real pushback on that academically. So, has anyone seen Arrival? Yeah. So, I mean, it's like linguist versus a physicist, and the physicist is a total asshole. It's like a classic kind of setup. The linguist and aliens are coming, right? So they talk in a funny way, or they communicate in a funny way with these circular patterns. The heptapods, right? Anyway, it turns out that because of their language, they can time travel. So if you learn that language, which the linguist does, then develops that capacity. So so early on in the thing, they're kind of going through their argument stuff, and then it's Amy Adams. She just says, "Well, there's the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis." So I'm sort of sitting there and watching this thing, thinking, "Oh, the linguists, they must love this, right? Because the physicist is getting the comeuppance." But then they put in this thing that linguists kind of hate. And just go with it. It's fantastic. It's great storytelling. It's fantastic, right? Because it's so extreme that language matters so much that it could give you this capacity. Anyway. Yeah, this is it. This how we do. Okay, let me tell you about this. So we had this paper, and then there was a letter. It's fair enough. There's a letter like from a research group or three characters in Europe who've done some work on all these things. Here they are. So they write a letter, and they're like, I guess the title doesn't tell you anything, but not much. See, they get upset about the frequency thing, right? And they have this claim. Here's the abstract, right? We get to say this: a misplaced due to a range of misconceptions about word usage frequency, word rank, and expert constructed word lists such as Luke. Now, people love this. It's just been released in some form now, 20th form. It's a ton of words, and they have all these different attributes associated with them that are indicated. Some of them have sentiment, right? That it's just a positive or a negative word emotionally. So they took this, it's called Luke, which we looked at back in 2007 and just immediately dismissed, I have to say, because it just was not what we wanted, right? We wanted something that had gradations of scores. So murder and, like shove negative words. They might not be in that list, but All right, so we didn't get much room to respond to it, but let me see if I spent a lot of time on this, but let me see if I can quickly tell you what it was. So they had these concerns that they went to Luke, and as is tradition, didn't really look at any words, right? So they did some things, they collected the words that had certain scores and showed something about them, but didn't look at the words. Again, these people, well, one of them at least is a physicist by background. So, they said the big problem was they found the function words in Luke, right? So there's a list of words, all this big list of words. You can say, okay, I want the words that are listed as function words, like the and of and whatever. So they get them, and they show there's a spread for them, that they have a big spread out distribution. So like the point is, our study is, at least for English, and they did it maybe for 2 other languages, didn't work, or clearly wasn't working because function words should be neutral, which is true of the and of, right? I mean, pretty neutral. But the problem is the words that are listed as function words in Luke are pretty spread out. So one of them, for example, is greatest, which it's fine to be, I don't care if you call it a function word, but if people are going to see that word, like that's got some positivity. And the word worst, I mean, anyway, this drove me completely insane. Here are a few others, more Luke function words. Yeah, so these are all, by their claim, all of these should be 5s. They all should be completely neutral because this other, this expert constructed thing over here said they're function words. They work in functional ways, but there are lots of kinds of function words. Interesting with numbers, which we'll see on this deeper meaning thing, is that small numbers are kind of weak and safe, and they kind of stay in this kind of one quadrant. But then when you pop to 1 million and 1 billion, like, yes, that's power and danger.
I like that 1 million is slightly higher than millions. Like, millions is a bit more complicated. Millions, perfect.
That's ridiculous. Millions has a slightly higher standard deviation. Too. A rarer word as well. Yeah, right? So what I would say, and you're right, but what I would say is like, this is within error, pretty good. Yeah. Past tenses, I think I've indicated, can be generally a little bit negative. Yeah. Yeah, lots of positive words in here. So they're ordered. That's pretty good. 16, I don't know about 16. But so these are words that at least, these are from this Luke. They're in our data set. They're ones that the Luke data set annotates as neutral. And so these are, or as function words. And these feel more neutral-ish. And then these are the ones that are down the bottom, at least by our scores. And, they're lots of negative stuff. I mean, no. Where's yes? Well, yes might not be in the list. Anyway, that's just a top. It's a ludicrous thing. Yeah. Yeah, so the problem was they made this, we tried to reproduce it. So they made this scatter plot here, and they're just taking words from Luke, but you don't know how much they're really being used properly. And so we put them in our usage, given in some corpus, right? For Google Books, right? So we took the Google Books usage thing and put where those words are from Luke, and they're kind of a mess. But if you then look at our structures, they're quite nice. And then it doesn't matter because rank and frequency of usage this is Zipf's law, right? They're inverses of each other, so they're very similar looking objects. God, what a struggle. Yeah. So they claim to have this big decrease with, well, there's a 10 to the minus 5. Sorry. plus 5.62 times this. Yeah, that's what a struggle. Yeah, I mean, this is just being silly by us. 10 to the minus 92, obviously. So just a weird response, you know. I mean, just a weird, and one of them, at least one of them's a physicist. I just don't. I mean, it's now 14, 15 years. People make a real mess of this, you know. You know, in the extremes of these things, like in public spaces, you know, using some of this stuff for. It's not to say we haven't done anything perfectly, but it's just slow and it's hard. You know, like the toxicity thing, which was just, I mean, it's just shockingly bad. It's shockingly bad. Right. So the nutshell for this, you know, is it's we have this positivity bias. It matches up. You know, it's this big data, big language kind of thing. It matches up with the Pollyanna principle, which is being observed in many small scale things. That term I think comes from Osgood, and Osgood I've mentioned before. Osgood is the one who came up with, let me see, it's Boucher, 1969, I think. Yeah, so Boucher and Osgood. So Osgood is this really central character in the history of measuring meaning. That's where the valence stuff comes from originally, the semantic differential stuff, which we'll get into properly next week. It's been incredibly interesting to kind of mess around with this, come back to it every 5 years, and I think finally really unpack the whole thing properly. And but it starts off with submarines, which is a bit strange, but it really kind of did a lot of extraordinary work. So this is a different space. This is yeah, it's exactly the thing that I guess I've said. There's a universal tendency to use positive words more frequently, diversely, and facilely than negative ones. And so they look at history. You know, this is 69, so there's 44. These are people interacting with each other. Like, so you're just actually counting the words. There's a real struggle here, obviously. How many papers there? 1, 8. Oh, look at this. I photocopied this. Wow. Wow. I really did. It throws me back. Anyway, Osgood pops up a lot. So 24 corpora, as I said. It's from around the world. It's pretty diverse in the language origins. We didn't have, you know, Finnish and Hungarian, like the fun. But you could sort of say that it's this language, right? We're talking, we're interacting with each other, we're sharing meaning, constructing things, getting stuff done. You know, the world can fall apart, but there's a lot of stuff existing, right? And we somehow have managed to do that. But this is something to kind of dig into more. That there are not quite what Osgood just said there, but negative emotions have to sort of cover maybe a bit more. There are a lot of positive words which aren't necessarily connected to emotion, right? But they're just sort of like building, you know, like the word build. That's kind of a positive word, you know. But when we get to you know, truly negative words, there can be some variation in there. But a lot of them at that bottom of that big list for LabMT are mostly wrapped around death, which okay. Yeah. So this is just some corporate stuff here. Yeah, let me see. Does it have a translation? This madness. Yeah. It's just appendix space. Do I have? No, that's still in. It's not so important, I guess. But this is, come on. Wow. Yeah, these are pretty gigantic. So these, for example, how do I make this? Does that work? Maybe that's the safest thing to do. We have the translation ones, so that's helpful to bring them into English. But this is, say, New York Times. These are the words that, I don't know what summer is like this, but yeah, if you look at the standard deviation of happiness for these things, that's sort of true as well. So this gets a little deeper into the distribution of these things. So some for some reason, has got a high standard deviation, but these are pretty low. But again, there's a sort of rare words and common words have similar standard deviation distributions, which is digging deeper into the whole thing, probably unnecessarily. Okay. So that's good. We'll come back to the other types of emotions. I don't know what to do with this. Okay, I'll just show you the start of this. So so we have this happiness thing. So it's a sort of this principled lexical instrument, right? We have these scores for words that are done offline, could be updated, improved, and we bring that to bear on some sort of corpus that's made in some other way. So those scores were these Likert scales, right? This is a different set of scores we obtained for phrases now. So it's going to be for phrases. This work was led by Sharon Alajasian and Jake Williams, who are married, and worked incredibly hard to get this thing to function. But it was a really, panometer, okay. So we noticed some of these kind of funny things. So this is a bit of a tricky one. Like this is mentions of the word McDonald's and then obesity rate. Doesn't mean much. It's messy. This is brunch, goes the other way. So we're just sort of messing around with these things a little bit. People who have brunch don't actually eat anything. This is another weird sort of thing. These aren't, I don't think we've published this. It's just sort of looking at stuff. It's difficult with all these sort of regressions at the same time. You have to be careful. But, cafe, like all of this stuff is anti-correlated with obesity and, obnoxiousness here. But the thing is, it's, this is a socioeconomic indicator, really. These ones were positively. So eat, wings, hungry, heartburn, and ham. So these are just choosing some words, playing around with it. It's not properly done. So this was something to kind of leap out into a bigger space, which was I'll just tell you a little bit about it. Okay, so now we've got I think we left off. I think that's true. Alaska and Hawaii. So 48 states plus DC. We upped our game a little bit with the map, and so the idea is we get all these tweets coming in. We're going to ascribe calorie scores. So nothing, completely different thing, right? So if someone mentions, hot dog, we will give it, which is ridiculous, right? We'll give it a score for how much a typical serving of that is in terms of calories. It's going to be incredibly crude and rough. If someone says skiing, we'll give it a score for calories in terms of typical expenditure, right? There are surveys or analyses have tried to figure these things out. Obviously, very rough for an hour. If someone says skiing, we're going to say, okay, here are calories for an hour of skiing. If they say, watching TV, we have scores for that. For an hour. So very, very crude thing to do. And we'll kind of put them together. So things like chocolate candy is there, cookie dough, watching TV or movie. So anything that was kind of like around watching TV kind of ends up in this activity. So that was some hard work done by them. This is Vermont. So there's skiing, running, snowboarding, hiking, sledding, walking, biking. There's less eating and less watching TV or movie. And this is what gives, and you see a big yellow bar there. This is why Vermont's activity in terms of this kind of not ridiculous measure of caloric output is higher than the average, because of these words. So skiing, of course, it's from people, but coming from resorts as well. It's actually middling in terms of input, and there's a lot of bacon on Vermont's tweets. At least this is back when we did it. Less chicken, more butter, more cookie dough, more coconut oil, da da da. So those things kind of come out, and you can see it's sort of it's about middle of the pack in terms of this ridiculous measurement. So we do this, and we kind of get what we just, instead of like doing a plus or minus thing, we divided the number of calories out by the number of calories in, to cut, because the plus or minus we felt might be, I mean, it's still gonna be a 1, I don't know. And then rank them, and if you rank them, here's Colorado, Wyoming, Vermont, Utah, Maine, right? These are in terms of this balance, Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, Arkansas, so they're down here. So this correlates with obesity rates, and then a bunch of other problematic things. So there's a couple of figures I was just going to show you before we finish, which will be the dominant food that people tweet about, or that accounts in those states tweet about. It's not just people, right? It's restaurants, it's whatever. And the dominant activity that people tweet about. And then we have graphs of like, given a state is above or below average, like which term is pushing it most away from that average, right? So Vermont's going to be, it's going to be skiing, right? Why is Vermont up? Skiing. So there is basically one kind of foodstuff and one activity that all states lead with, right? They're dominated by. Then it's a differential on top. What do you think the most dominant foodstuff and the most dominant activity are? Activities are really anything. Going to church, anything where you could measure someone, like sitting in a chair, So what's the dominant food stuff that gets tweeted? Right. And then activity. Well, they're a big deal, but it's not what people do every day. It's close to that. There's something you might accompany yourself if you're sitting down.
Oh, TV.
Right. Okay. So let's have a look. So there are a few variations, right? There's cookies here and ice cream, but pizza would be a close second. So this is the dominant word. And then, right, watching TV or movie. And I think that one is uniform. Yeah. There's ice cream here in Mississippi, and which is totally fair enough. And then cookies over here, right? Yeah. So that's the dominant thing. And then what we're sort of interested in, what's pushing them above or below. These are colored by, their scores. Yeah, South Dakota really had a high caloric intake thing. There's one. Which one has fracking? Both of them? No, I think they have some really good, there's some really weird money things that go on now in South Dakota. Like there's some weird, yeah. Anyway, all right. So international, whatever. It's like the Cayman Islands of the of the prairies. Wyoming and Colorado, right? So they're greener here in Vermont, right? They're all a bit greener, so they're doing well for themselves. We can measure smugness, right? That would be part of it. Okay, so what's going on with the activities? So dancing, this people don't say they're dancing necessarily. They tweet something along those lines. It could be classes, it could be whatever. This is a messy thing we made. It's supposed to be this like real-time public health thing. So skiing comes up in Utah. Like these are why it's, and running in Colorado and Wyoming. Like why are they? Running's a tricky word, right? So many meanings for running. But why are they above average in terms of this sort of output? We get skiing, running, these sorts of things. But down here it's eating. The activity, the word is eating, sitting in Tennessee. Showering, if I got it right, this is Virginia. And then talking on the phone, getting my nails done in New Jersey, using the treadmill actually in Rhode Island, skiing here, and mountain biking. This is not a this is a pretty crazy thing that sort of works. And then Michigan just simply has laying down as a obviously we did this in a crazy way. The foods that get pushed away, tomato, this, it could be all sorts of reasons why people tweet about that. It could be a branding kind of thing. These are pushing them around, but you see cheese in here um, for Pennsylvania. Bacon, so Vermont, right? Lobster for Maine, so that makes sense. Lobster for Massachusetts. Crab action, yep, there you go. Grits in Georgia. Um, there's just straight up butter, some more bacon over here. It's bacon. They really talk about bacon a lot, I guess, in South Dakota. And then in this region, you've got more like chocolate candy, corn, which really we're all made out of anyway. So that's the most honest one, probably, right? Donuts for Texas. Donuts are a big thing. I mean, they're a big thing. It's a big thing, right? Chocolate candy. Da, da, da. So yeah, Michigan has laying down and chocolate candy are the things pushing it in its directions. Look, it's a pretty obviously this could be made better and better in lots of ways, but it's a weird thing to have done. I think it's a good place to stop. Yeah, sitting. Wow. Yep. But if you look at the nuances, there are things like attending church, which actually could be quite active.